Choosing the right editing software for your skill level can make or break your podcast, not because of the quality that these different softwares might produce, but more so because you'll quit before your show even has a chance to begin. Because editing is one of the biggest time sucks, and it might cost a little too much for you to hand off right now. I've stress tested all the editing software you can imagine since Final Cut Pro was king in 2012. And in this video, I'm going to explore the nuances and trade-offs that come with each software and who it's going to be right for. And I'm going to also cover the principle on how you can view a lot of these new softwares that are popping up, especially that are, AI powered and AI enabled. I'm also going to crown the best from my perspective and experience teaching this stuff to hundreds of clients over the years. Misbah Haque, by the way, I'm the author of Pod Mahal, and in 2016, I started my very first podcast out of my childhood bedroom with no credibility, no audience, and within 52 weeks, I landed my dream job in the Bay Area, getting to coach Fortune 1000 executives, professional athletes, and high performers from all walks of life. I've also had the chance to co-host and co-produce shows that have gone on to do over 1 million downloads and have become successful client acquisition channels. On this channel, my goal is to help you own your means of production. I also offer free podcast strategy sessions if you need some more hands-on support, which you can book in the description below. Now, the crawl stage is focused on getting your episodes out consistently and not getting super overwhelmed with the post-production. And so the winner, I think in this case, is usually Riverside.fm. This started out as a remote recording studio tool that was really more professional and felt better than Zoom and gave you and your editors more control in post-production. But over the years, as they have dumped more and more resources into podcasting, they have actually built out a pretty robust editor that started out as being just for clips, and then over time has now become something where you could edit the full episode, you could import other projects into there. And for a lot of my clients and a lot of beginners, this is the go-to because it's kind of an all-in-one solution. And you can actually decide after a little while if you need to couple it with another software like Descript, for example. But in many cases, with what Riverside is capable of, if you are recording remotely, I think that, you might be good to go with that. Now, you might be thinking about GarageBand and iMovie. These are also solid options, especially if you're in a position where, let's say you are not actually recording video and you want to do audio only. GarageBand might be good to go in the beginning. Or let's say that you are trying to just use something that's already built in and you have familiarity with, like iMovie, then it might be worth starting with that. But I still think that Riverside is going to be something you might want to try out because of just the ease of simplicity and all-in-one workflow that it has to offer. So that would be what I would consider in the crawl stage. Now, the walk stage is about having more control as you find your voice. So let's say Riverside you find pretty good, but you want something a little bit more advanced. Descript is going to be my pick for you in this situation because they started out years ago as an easy-to-use, friendly software. And I think over the years, as they've added more features, it has become a little harder to navigate and use, but it is still worth learning because, there are so many things that you can do inside of it. Technically, Descript is one of the first, AI powered editing softwares before everybody started making them or calling themselves that. They have been using that and embedding it from the very beginning. Because remember, Descript is focused on text-based editing, which means you can basically edit like a Google Doc. And with some of the recent updates that they have actually added and will likely continue to add, you can basically chat with the underlord and say, hey, I want you to adjust the sound and I want you to trim the beginning and the end. And it can basically go in and automatically do that. So pretty impressive. And there are a lot of other features that if you find yourself using them, it's just a little bit more advanced and nice to have that variety with Riverside if you can, fit that in your budget. The next software I want to cover is CapCut. This got popularized when there was nothing really better on mobile to edit Instagram Reels and TikToks. And so it's also owned by ByteDance, which owned TikTok. And so basically it's one of those things where it is user friendly, it is easy to use. I've had clients in the past who use it and they've been able to do lots of cool edits where you wouldn't be able to tell that, oh, you did this in CapCut. It looks like something you might have used Premiere Pro and After Effects in. Now, that being said, there are some things that you might run into as limitations and you might need to get the Pro version. But in many cases, I think a lot of people can get by with CapCut if some of the previous options that I mentioned weren't doing it for you. Now, in the run stage, I would consider this professional production where you are doing some things that 80% of people are not. So for example, if you are shooting in person and you have, let's say, multiple camera angles, and let's say another step, like for example on this, I'm shooting in log, so I'm going to have to color grade this later. I can't just pop it into Descript and it automatically does that. And so if you are doing certain things like that, where you have to consider some of these workarounds, you're automatically going to need heftier software. And or let's say that, Descript, for example, and a lot of these other tools are cloud-based, right? So you need good internet connection in order to work and do your thing. Versus if you are more keen on offline tools, right? You want to be able to edit on the plane. You want to be able to, knock this stuff out on the go without internet connection, and you want it to feel fast. As long as your computer is set up for that kind of thing, these tools are definitely better. And there are these trade-offs. So for example, like I'll teach Descript and Riverside to most of my clients because that is what's approachable. That is the thing that they are going to use. The second that I introduce them to something like a Premiere Pro, it's like your eyes glaze over and you know that you are not going to come back to this because it's just too intimidating when you open it up. But if you find yourself in a place where you're like, oh, that doesn't intimidate me, I'm willing to learn it a little bit and put in the time, it can be worth it to learn, Final Cut, Adobe Premiere Pro, DaVinci, one of these tools that are a little more robust. So for me, Premiere Pro is the tool that me and my team continue to use. And a lot of this is sunk cost, right? So we've spent years mastering it, remembering shortcuts, and certain things that would take longer for other people who are new to it to do. It's just second nature to us already. And so depending on the experience you already have with other tools, you might find yourself gravitating to one of these. Now, let me explain the trade-offs between each one of them. So Final Cut is basically owned by Apple, right? And one of the things I remember is I bought this back in like 2011 or something like that on the laptop that I had then. So it was basically, I thought, just getting built in to my laptop, but turns out you have lifetime access. So there's no monthly subscription. There's just a one-time, I forget how much it was. I think it was $300, $350, something like that. But you get lifetime access to the software. Even as I have upgraded and had new laptops since then, I can download it from the App Store directly onto my computer. Now let's cover DaVinci. DaVinci is great because it is very popular in the Hollywood and film circles, and it's known for producing great colors and having amazing options for color grading and color correcting. Similar to how Canons are known for producing more accurate color than Sony's, it's kind of like that with DaVinci versus other editing tools. I would also say after using it that it was easy to use, but again, there's just a sunk cost thing where like I'm used to Premiere Pro, all these plugins, everything I've done is already in there, where it's like it was harder to make that switch fully. But I do find it easier to use, and a lot of people really appreciate the fact that this is also a one-time fee and you do not have to pay a monthly subscription. You can kind of get lifetime access to the license. Now, let's cover Adobe Audition. So Adobe Audition is different from Adobe Premiere Pro. Adobe Audition would be the equivalent of Apple's GarageBand. It's focused on audio only, and I'm actually using it right now to record. So the audio version is actually being recorded into my laptop through Adobe Audition, and then the video is being recorded through the camera. So you might find yourself in a situation, if you are, let's say, doing this in person, if you're doing that with 2 or 3 speakers and you want to record directly into your software, Adobe Audition is going to be the tool that is great for that. Again, you could use GarageBand if you wanted to, but Adobe is another thing you might consider because you might also have the Adobe suite. Let's say you're using Photoshop or After Effects or something like that. You already have access to Adobe Audition, so might as well use it. But the next one I want to cover is Adobe Premiere Pro. So this is my favorite, and this is the one that I've just invested so much time over the years into using. And I can tell you, even though I had some editing experience with Final Cut and all this stuff growing up, Adobe Premiere was a monster to learn. But once you've learned it, there's just this transferability where you can learn other softwares pretty easily, and it just looks more complicated than it is. And again, it is owned by Adobe, so if you have the suite, it can be worth getting. And there's just this security, I guess, because Adobe owns it, and they're a behemoth, so the amount of resources they pour into their tools over the years is pretty impressive. They have stepped up their game in the past couple years in particular, especially I would say once Descript came out and really challenged, I would say, the industry by introducing text-based editing. You can see how they were able to add that. Adobe was able to add that years after it came out and the technology became a little more accessible. If you also have access to the suite, you might use Adobe Premiere Pro Beta. That's actually what I use a lot of the time. And the cool thing there is there's just advanced features that aren't available in the full version yet that can be worth using in many cases. And so there are some trade-offs where, again, harder to learn. And also because it's this bigger company, there are certain features that they're not incentivized to actually build in until they really feel like it, right? So there wasn't that much innovation for years. And then it's starting to get really interesting now that there are a lot more competitors popping up and they're incentivized to actually improve their product. So for me, I like to do my color correcting, color grading, and my sound inside of Adobe Premiere Pro. And then I will typically, export and polish it and finalize with Descript, because Descript is very quick at removing ums and uhs and filler words and, being able to see in text what I want to remove. But I will say this, if you are trying to consolidate and again just to use one or the other and you're considering these, Adobe has access to text-based editing now as well. So it isn't, I would say, as great as Descript is. There are certain like retakes and things like that are easier to spot in Descript versus I would say in Adobe's, but it still does the same thing where you could delete a piece of text and it's actually corresponding to the timeline, and deleting it and making the cut from there as well. So if you do not have that many cuts and you do it pretty unedited aside from the beginning and the end, you might be fine. You might prefer Adobe Premiere in that situation. But again, let me remind you, I've seen too many clients paralyzed by trying to take on some of these more advanced tools to where it literally gets tabled for a year, 2 years, or, you rely fully on an editor that can do it for you. And so the best software is the one that you will use, right? It's similar to the best diet or the best workout program. The best one is whatever you're actually going to stick to. Now, this brings me to the next level of software that's going to be attractive, especially as you're seeing new options pop up everywhere. And it is basically these new AI-powered, AI-enabled tools. For example, something like Cast Magic or something like Opus Pro. Opus is very popular for being able to chop up clips and, do that automatically based on the transcript, basically, right? It'll tell you how the viral score, the engagement score, all this cool stuff. But over time, Riverside has been able to adopt that technology. Descript also has that technology. And so now you have to make these trade-offs where is it worth it to get something like an Opus? It sounds great on the surface, all of these AI-powered options that come out, and it looks super easy. Like, wow, it's made editing so accessible and simple. But there are typically some limitations you will run into somewhere down the line. And then you just have to decide, is that trade-off worth it? So a quick example is with Opus, they can, capture all the clips, they can do all the cool stuff I said, you can add B-roll, whatever, right? But then when you export, it only gives you up to 1080p, right? So you can't export a 4K clip the way that, let's say, even if you shot it in 4K, you just don't have that option yet. Again, these are things that they might change over time and make available, but there's weird limitations like that you might run into. Or let's say that, you upload your file into a piece of software and it says, oh, the max limit is 10 gigabytes, and you shot your stuff with higher quality cameras and stuff that would make it 20 gigabytes, right? So those are weird limitations you'll run into. But if you don't, for the vast majority of people who are recording remotely, some of those tools can be worth entertaining. But again, if you are in that position, I think that using something like a Riverside is a great place to begin. And a great rule of thumb is to know that these new AI-powered softwares that come out are really designed for power users. So as you have a $1 billion plus company like Adobe, where they're going to inevitably miss out on certain features just because they're catering to a wider group of people. And what this does is basically open up opportunity for somebody to move faster and make something that serves one or two of those features. Now, if those are worth it for you, those tools are definitely worth considering, especially when you venture into the realm of podcast promotion. There are tools like Cast Magic, which can actually be really nice, but it is an extra piece of software, right? It is something that isn't enabling you at the moment to just edit the full episode for you. It's more so once the full episode is done, then it can help you create all the different assets and promotion things that you actually want. So that trade-off is very important to keep in mind. The other thing I wanted to quickly mention is in the run stage, the tools that I gave, like Adobe Premiere Pro, Final Cut, DaVinci, these are professional tools that also have people making thousands and thousands of templates and plugins and presets, all this stuff that is actually compatible and enhances the features of the software. So for example, think back to the days of websites like WordPress. Before there was Squarespace and stuff like that. Squarespace is great, but you might run into certain limitations. So WordPress was this thing where it was kind of like the App Store, right? People can make apps for people who are using WordPress. And so similarly, you have people constantly supporting these top 3 tools that are in the run category, which makes it kind of worth it if some of those appeal to you, right? If you like some of the LUTs for color grading, or maybe the text animation, or certain, things like the subscribe button popping up, right? Some of those elements are very compatible with the 3 that I mentioned. So that's another scenario to consider if that's important to you. But again, now wrapping up, giving you the winner, I definitely think is going to be Riverside to begin, because we're keeping beginners in mind that are just trying to get started. Next up is going to be Descript, because of the extra, level that it can provide. And then number 3 is going to be Adobe Premiere Pro. And of course, this is my personal opinion, but I would love to hear what you think. What are you using? What do you enjoy? Drop it in the comments. I would love to hear from you. And again, if you need some more hands-on support, feel free to book a free podcast strategy session with me in the description below. I appreciate you hanging out and taking the time, and I will see you on the next one.